As a bank that focuses on business, we work with business leaders all day, every day. We have a front row seat to what's working and what has potential. The First Business Bank podcast is dedicated to sharing insights to help you work better, smarter, and faster to achieve your goals. Let's get into the show.
Hello, I'm Mark Malloy, CEO of First Business Bank. I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the First Business Bank podcast. Today's topic is business succession planning. Today, more than ever, this is an issue nearly all businesses and business owners, as well as business leaders, are faced with at some point in time. Yet the pathway is often unclear. And today, we hope to help bring some mapping to that journey for you. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues, Christine Waldschmidt, who's an attorney and vice president and trust advisor with First Business Bank, and Brendan Freeman, who's the president of our private wealth group. Welcome to both of you. How do you define business succession planning?
Well, Mark, we've all heard the old saying, you have to start with the end in mind. That's definitely what we're talking about with business succession planning. Business owners have to contemplate what that exit could look like potentially. And that starts with a lot of thoughtful reflection. That starts with talking with individuals that they know and they trust, like our team at First Business, like their CPA or their attorney. But it's really that plan around how they're going to walk away from the business or how they're going to potentially sell that business or transfer it within their family, transfer it to their employers, that kind of thing. That thoughtful contemplation is business succession planning.
Good. Christine, from your perspective, is it ever too soon or is it ever too late to get started in this process?
Well, that's an easy question to answer. It is never too soon. And unfortunately, sometimes it really can be too late. It's always good when you're running a successful business. It's always good to have in mind where you see the future of the business going and always start that succession planning early in the game. The most critical issue, if your business succession planning is tied in with your family estate planning, and part of your goal is to get the business to your heirs while minimizing estate taxes, it can sometimes be too late. There are so many tools in the tax code that can be utilized to get the business over time out of your estate and ultimately get it into the hands of your heirs, your children, grandchildren, and hopefully minimizing the estate tax. There are annual gifting exclusions, and then, of course, the unified credit. And using those tools as early as possible can eliminate huge amounts of estate tax, particularly if you have a young business and maybe that business isn't really even showing much of a profit yet. Perhaps it's burdened by some debt. It's in its early stages. If you actually have an opportunity, because the relative market value is small, to get that to the next generation, and then all of the appreciation and value over time can happen after you've gotten that out of your estate. I had a client that came in at age 89 and wanted to figure out how to get that business out of his estate and into the hands of his children and grandchildren. And it was too late. His business value at that point was far in excess of the unified credit, the amount that he could pass without incurring estate tax. And ultimately, the business had to be liquidated to pay estate tax. So it's always good to start early, but particularly when it's tied to family succession planning and estate planning together.
Brendan, what's the biggest hurdle people face in this process?
Well, Mark, there's a lot of different hurdles that they'll face as business owners, but if I had to boil it down, it'd come down to two things. One, it would be fear of giving up control, and then two would be procrastination. What I mean by fear of giving up control, no one's going to run the business. No one's going to operate the business quite like a business owner. They've invested so much of their blood and their sweat, and their tears and everything into the business. That sweat equity has given them comfort over a long period of time. And so giving that up is a really difficult proposition for business owners. The other thing is procrastination. You're oftentimes so involved in the day-to-day of the business. These are really, really busy people oftentimes. And so being able to step back and strategize in a thoughtful way to make sure that they get it right is something that is better saved for another day. Let's just stay in the business. And so, as Christine's example talked about earlier, sometimes individuals just wait till it's too late. And so we as advisors try to encourage our clients and the business owners that we work with to start contemplating those conversations and really step back and be a little bit more strategic. But yeah, those are some of the challenges that they face.
Mm-hmm. Christine, if people have a hard time getting started, what's a good first step for them to take?
Well, as Brendan said earlier, start with the end in mind. So if you're not sure where to begin, think about what you want the end product to look like. What is your ultimate goal? Do you envision building up this company so you can realize the greatest value in a sale to a third party and then you can sail off into the sunset? Or are you envisioning transferring control and ownership to key employees? Are you envisioning passing this on to your children? You have to know what the end goal is, and that will inform the steps that you need to take to get there.
Brendan, what kind of exit options can a business owner consider, and what are the pros and cons of each of them?
Thanks, Mark. For those watching or listening to this podcast, the details of what I'm about to describe are available in the show notes below. But there's a few different things to consider. The first is that outright sale that Christine was just referencing, that kind of sailing off into the sunset, washing your hands of the business, selling the business to a third party, realizing the potential full value, and just walking away. And so that's for many of our business owners, that's a real positive. The downside of that is that you give up control. You're no longer involved with the business. You're potentially no longer involved with your employees, with the clients, customers that you've worked with. And unfortunately, when you do get that big pot of cash, oftentimes you have to pay the tax man. And so there'll be some capital gains that you might have to incur from that type of transaction. But that'd be the first option. Next option might be a partial sale, where you take some money off the table. You do a portion of the business, and the devil's in the details as far as what you negotiate, but you take some cash off and you potentially diversify. This can, for a business owner, this can reduce stress, and this can potentially allow you to stay in the business in the way that you want to stay in the business. And so I've seen situations where business owners still have good client contact. They still are very involved with key customers. They still have regular interaction with certain employees, and they're able to do the things that they want to do without the stress of running the business. Another positive of this type of situation, especially in a growth organization where the company continues to grow, is you might potentially be setting yourself up for another bite at the apple down the road. And so you take some cash off for today, and you set yourself up to potentially realize another financial benefit down the road. The downside here would be some of the capital gains, as well as getting used to working with a new partner. If you have a really strong feeling for who that new partner is, maybe that's something you can get over pretty quickly. But now that they have control, they might operate the business in a different way. And can you get comfortable with that as a business owner? And so depending upon what you negotiate, that's what a partial sale could look like. The third option might be transferring the business to someone in your family or one of your heirs as part of a broader estate planning strategy. This is going to allow you to fulfill on some of the things that you want to do from an estate planning perspective and potentially reduce tax. And it also allows you to keep the business in the family and maybe keep some oversight as to what's going on, keep some of those relationships with customers and with employees. The downside here is that oftentimes when you're doing this to minimize estate tax, you're not going to necessarily have this big liquidity event. You're not going to have this big pot of cash, and you might not be buying that big boat to sail off into the sunset. And so really thinking through what your motivation, what your goal might be. And if estate planning is the primary motivation or the goal, this might work. Keeping it in the family is a goal. This also might work. But there's going to be pluses and minuses of that situation. An additional one might be to transfer the company to a key employee or maybe a third party by taking on a note or setting up some type of arrangement with a buy-sell and a shareholder agreement where there's a predetermined value. And maybe this is tied to incentive compensation. There's pros to this in the fact that you can protect employees, especially if those employees are critical to running the business or critical to the customer base. You can maintain control by doing this. But the downside, again, is that you're not going to have the large lump sum of cash, and it might not help you as far as realizing some of those dreams that you'd hope to realize. The last option, and a very employee-friendly option, is what's commonly referred to as an ESOP, and that's an employee stock ownership plan. That's a great way to protect your employees. That's a great way to take care of those senior leaders within your business and have continuity within the business to continue serving your customers and to continue taking care of those employees. These employees feel a great sense of ownership with an ESOP, and there are several tax benefits to an ESOP. The downside here can be that it's very costly to set up and to maintain. And it can take significant time as far as the administration, as well as the employee education component, Mark, that comes with this. And so high level, those are the different options from a transition perspective, but with a lot of thought that goes into each of them because there are definitely pluses and minuses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Christine, what if the business owner just doesn't have a solution? You've outlined all these different options to them, and they're just not sure that they can make a decision. Is there anything that can be considered at that point in time, or providence that we as experts might provide in that consideration?
Well, Mark, that is a very common situation, in fact. Oftentimes, because business owners want their cake and they want to eat it too, they want everything. They want to minimize estate taxes, but they don't want to give up control. They want to realize a big payoff and sail off into the sunset, but they, again, don't want to give up control and want to have input on what the future of the company looks like. It's oftentimes the conflicting poles because, well, in theory, yes, they have estate planning goals. They understand that they're not going to be running the business forever, and they have to have a succession plan in place. They have to ultimately, every business owner has to ultimately decide, what are my priorities? And you have to force rank them. You have to decide, yes, these things are all important, which is more important? And only after you have done that forced ranking and really decided the estate planning and moving this to my heirs has to take precedence over realizing a big payout, or whichever, or the other direction. But you have to decide as a business owner which is more important, which end goal is more important. And once you can really make yourself do that forced ranking of priorities, again, then you can back up and figure out what you need to do to make that happen. And truly, your actions and the steps you're going to take are going to be very different. If you're looking at transferring to the next generation and you're trying to structure minority discounts and figure out how to get this out of your estate, you're not trying to maximize value in that setting. You're trying to come up with actually the most modest valuation that the IRS will buy. Flip side, if you're trying to market to an outside third party, you want to polish this gem up and squeeze every penny out of the transaction and get the highest dollar value you can. I say that because it's really important. I've had people start in and make stabs at creating valuation when they aren't sure what direction they're going. And I tell them, stop. You don't want to get a valuation that you would use to market to a third party and have that out there as evidence to be used against you when you're trying to do a minority discount. So think about it, force rank your priorities, and then start at the beginning.
Good. Brendan, what about the owner that just doesn't want to retire?
Yeah, this is happens more than you think, right? Again, going back to what I was talking about earlier, and your identity being driven by the business that you run. In many cases, you see situations where business owners just love what they do. and they love their employees, they love their customers, and they're not quite ready. And so I think there's a difference between owning the business and being employed by the business. And oftentimes when you're in the business, it's tough to differentiate, but with a thoughtful business succession plan and thinking through what makes the most sense for you, you can differentiate between being the owner and being an employee. And what I'm talking about here is you can, in the negotiation of a potential sale, as an example, you can negotiate a consulting contract. You can negotiate to stay on with the business for a period of time. And you can also negotiate that you want to do the things that you love doing or that you think are the most valuable to the business. And so thinking through those details and kind of putting on that hat as an employee compared to the hat of an owner is different, but it's certainly something that we've seen many business owners do in this type of transition. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to retire. Now, on the other hand, if you want to retire and sail off into the sunset, you can do that too.
Those are great thoughts. And I hope that we've brought some answers and some mapping to our audience today. Christine and Brendan, thank you for taking time to share your thoughts and experiences with our audience today. And to you, our audience, thanks for listening in on our conversation. We hope you found this topic helpful and applicable to your company as well as to your own planning. And let us know if there are topics or information you'd like to learn more about. And join us next time on the First Business Bank podcast.
If you want more content like what you just heard delivered straight to your inbox, go to firstbusinessbankpodcast.com. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the First Business Bank podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave a quick rating of the show. Thanks so much for listening. First Business Bank, member FDIC.